Okay, well, good evening, everyone. A special welcome to all our guests tonight for the final session for the Property Owners Association, our final webinar for the year. And it's a terrific sought-after topic that we have on tonight, and we're very privileged to have our sponsors and special guests tonight for the site Foreman. Talking about the opportunities in the boarding house development space. And I guess with the sort of low yield environment, investing environment that's going on at the moment, property investors like yourself are looking for better returns. And certainly there's no better opportunity than taking a look at boarding house development or repurposing properties for what is you're playing in the affordable housing and rooming space. And before we go on, I know there's a lot of new guests on board that aren't familiar with the Property Owners Association. And just a little bit by way of background, my name is John Gilmovich. I'm the president. And the Property Owners Association is the only non-for-profit organisation that really represents the mum and dad private landlord market in New South Wales. And it's run predominantly by volunteers. We're certainly not getting paid to do this, and we're taking no commissions from anyone. Just want to make it absolutely clear that this is pure voluntary work and a passion that we have as a committee to bring you all those things that are in front of you, including our main purpose, which is to lobby for and on behalf of the private landlord market. So we come together as a committee, we discuss white papers with the government, we make submissions and recommendations around policy and regulations when and if it comes up. But so much it's coming up very often these days because there's so much change going on within the actual property space. So as a member, it is a membership organisation, and we rarely bring free webinars forward, but we just felt quite generous and the topic was quite interesting, and we just wanted to put it on for you free of charge for tonight as a gift to us. And we'd like for you to have a look at the Property Owners Association because it's really a connection for you to navigate through, the property investing jungle. We do represent properties that include residential, commercial, industrial, and of course we've got some specialist areas such as boarding houses and even boutique hotels. And we connect those members of ours to third parties I guess in property investing. It takes a team. It takes a team, and especially boarding house development, you need the right team around you. You need a lot of guidance, and so we connect you to all those sort of third-party industry businesses and individuals through our membership. And this webinar especially has been brought to you by some of our sponsors that have helped us over the years along the way, and helped our members with a lot of their challenges, such as development and insurance, of course, advice through proper accountancy and planning, and even lawyers. We have expertise lawyers on our panel who can start off some dialogue with you and help you along that journey, along the property investing journey. And before we launch into the webinar, of course, just want to say that anything we talk and discuss about tonight is of a general nature only. Please don't take it as one-on-one advice. We generally talk about information from our own experiences through to our guest presenters who will discuss their personal journeys and of course the case studies. The case studies are important. And we bring forward to you statistics, all those facts around property investing, and they all come from terrific reputable sources as well. So after this webinar, sorry, if you do have any specific one-on-one consultation that you will need, you will need to reach out individually to make an appointment moving forward. So we won't be going too deep into information, but we'll give you a terrific general overview of tonight's topic. So as I mentioned, we have a terrific panel of experts, and with us tonight is our boarding house chairperson, Peter Dormier, with some 25 years experience in rooming and affordable housing. And Peter's been very vocal over the years with submissions and discussing matters with the government and of course grappling with the ever-changing legislation. He's an owner-operator himself, so it's not just I guess the theory and the legislation part of it. He is a hands-on manager and owner of a rooming boarding house and a dwelling. And I'm going to get Peter to take over from here and introduce himself and have a quick chat before we launch into the formal presentation. Peter, over to you.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks a lot. I just quickly just ask Claudia, I think if you mute, you're getting a bit of reverb. It might be coming from your... thanks very much, Claudia. Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Peter Dormier, and I'm Secretary of the Property Owners Association. And I just wanted to quickly run through some regulatory issues that have been occurring quite recently in the boarding house space. And I'll just take a few minutes of your time and run through them. I assume we can all see the screen. It's all up and running. 2020 has been a very big year. There's been a lot of unprecedented events, I suppose, but two of them that are quite pertinent that relate to the boarding house industry are two major regulatory issues that are being reviewed and basically discussed. The first one that I want to talk about tonight briefly is the statutory review of the Boarding House Act. And that relates to the way boarding houses are managed and the relationships between the operator and the residents in the building. You're not required to use the Boarding House Act or letting agreements. You can use residential tenancy agreements, but many operators and residents prefer the boarding house type letting arrangements because they're more flexible and they enable better supply options, which the residential tenancy market doesn't permit. So I just want to briefly talk about that review, and also I'll touch on the proposed new diversity SEP, and do keep in mind that is an explanation of intended effect. It's not a draft proposal yet, it's a explanation of intended effect. The main thing to keep in mind with both these regulatory documents is we are still in the early stages. Governments are still drafting and assessing these things and putting it out to stakeholders and getting feedback. So it is a little dangerous to make broad stroke statements because the devil is in the detail and we haven't seen that yet. But I'll just give you a very brief update as to where those documents are and what they're about. The first one, as I say, was the Boarding House Act. That was introduced some 7-8 years ago, and it was designed to provide a legal structure around the arrangements between operators who use letting agreements with their residents. The government has reviewed that legislation that was brought in 5 to 7 years ago, and after an in-depth process of consultation with government and also public consultation, the government has proposed 21 recommendations so as to ensure the viability of the boarding house sector. I won't go into details, but there are probably 4 main themes that come through. The first one is that the name of the Act is to be changed to the Share Accommodation Act. The renaming is part of a broadening of the scope. Currently, the Boarding House Act only applies to a few hundred registered boarding houses. The problem with that is that a large segment of the managed share accommodation market is not covered at all. And so what they plan to do by broadening the scope is to have an act that will cover all residents of share accommodation. So that could, for example, be someone who's subletting a room in someone's house, whether they be in a tenancy arrangement or it's a homeowner, just so as to give some basic rights and some basic structure to that. Currently, the system is based on occupancy principles. There's nothing really standardised. There are some sort of principles that you must comply with, you know, reasonably clean house, etc. But it's not structured in a standardised arrangement. Each resident and operator can come up with their own agreements that suit their respective needs. It's interesting that they're going to be pushing towards standardising all the occupancy agreements. I find it quite amazing that you have, for example, one government department like the planning department that is pushing diversity and the importance of that. And then you have another government department who's now pushing towards standardisation. So, you know, there seems to be some contradiction going on there. It is potentially a shame. Currently, there is a wonderful degree of variation in the documentations and the letting agreements that prevail. And we know from the 5-year boarding house study that having diverse supply options is very important for residents. It gives them a greater well-being, having a diversity of options in terms of housing. We're just concerned that this diversity may be lost if you have a very rigid, standardised system. Another theme is there'll be a strengthening of the rights of residents of share accommodation. This is also of concern. Basically, boarding houses are an alternative source of housing. The great strength of boarding houses, it's a niche supply that is you know, flexible, easy in, easy out, stuff like that. The more that they push the pendulum towards, replicating a residential tenancy model means you have less of this diversity, less options that operators can provide, and you know, it just gets tighter and tighter in terms of the supply systems. And then the fourth theme is there'll be additional provisions that will be brought in to address health, safety and overcrowding. You know, there's a number of examples. One of them is, for example, Fire and Rescue New South Wales will be presumably having a larger role. They'll no longer need a warrant to check a premises. They'll be able to just get a permission out of the Fire Commissioner. There'll be additional powers for fair trading, and then also councils will be permitted to issue fines. Well, anyhow, these are the proposals or the recommendations. All of this, of course, is currently being drafted. And in terms of, as I say, in terms of timelines, it is all being drafted as we speak. We are expecting that there'll be further stakeholder consultations in early 2021. At some stage after that, they'll finalise their drafting and produce a document for public consultation. We've been advised that that will be made public, and there'll be a further process of submissions and review, and then it just goes through the normal processes after that in terms of getting permission from or approval from ministers and the state government. So there's a lot going to be happening on this front in 2021. People who are members of the Property Owners Association, we will keep you up to date and we will keep you in the loop, and we will be seeking your input, because basically we rely on you for our direction in terms of how to communicate with government and help government produce better documentation and regulations. The second thing I want to briefly touch on tonight is the proposed new diversity SEP. Now, I just want to stress that this is currently, recently in July, the government issued an explanation of intended effect. It's not a draft paper, it's not a final paper, it's just I suppose, seeking feedback paper. So once again, we are at early stages and you know, a lot of the issues that were raised in that document were attempts by the government to get feedback to assist them in producing documentation. Look, there's a lot to it, and I'm probably missing a lot by summarising it this way, but broadly, there's two major thrusts. There's this new concept of, or new legislated concept of build to rent. This table sort of demonstrates them in four columns. The first one being build to rent, and that's basically extremely large, 50+ developments, single ownership, and the objective is to supply long-term tenure housing. You know, there's been talk of this sort of stuff being a way of converting high-rise developments in the CBD, residential developments in the CBD. It's that sort of thrust. This is really billionaire sort of developments, and there will be various concessions, including the possibility of land tax concessions for the construction of these things. One of the other themes with this is it's a job creator. Look, we think that just as many jobs and development could be achieved on a smaller scale, and you avoid these potential high-rise ghettos. But once again, the devil is in the detail, and it's difficult to comment at this stage. Now, in terms of the plans, the planning direction for the boarding house, the current boarding house market, we're seeing 3 new segments being split out of the current new generation boarding houses. The first one being the co-living, which would be probably the structure that's most closest to new generation boarding houses, except they're larger, 30 to 35 square metres. And they, I would presume, would be more of your upmarket type co-living boarding houses. The second group would be student housing. These would be specifically designed for areas very close to educational facilities, stuff like that. If you notice the room size, it's very small, 10 square metres. They're also suggesting they would permit even smaller rooms. So it is specific for tertiary education students and stuff like that. And then the third category is what I suppose would be the traditional boarding house market. They're roughly the same sort of dimensions, and you know, Stephen will go into some of the mechanics with room sizes and stuff like that. But the interesting change with the boarding houses, it would be specifically affordable housing only. So this is a big move. And if we look at the next screen, one of the challenges, I suppose, in the proposed diversity SEP is they are looking at reducing the development concessions, and it's fairly substantial. There'd be a reduction in the floor space bonus ratios. The parking would remain, well, depending on where it is, largely the same. They would also remove the low density development mandated approval. And thirdly, and most importantly, the new definition of a boarding house would be that it must be affordable. And I think we've got an example of the definition they're proposing. On the left, you can see the existing definition, but on the right, you'll see highlighted in yellow that they would be pushing for it to be strictly affordable rental accommodation, and even to the extent that they may require it to be managed by a registered not-for-profit community housing provider. So this is a very interesting development. And I think if you read the EIE, the explanation of intended effect, they even concede within their own document that these affordability requirements would mean that this type of boarding house development is no longer facilitated by the planning system, which is quite interesting because one of the purposes of the diversity SEP is to improve supply of affordable housing. And I must confess, I struggle to get my head around this. They're proposing a SEP to improve affordability, but they're actually conceding that the SEP, this proposed diversity SEP, will actually not facilitate affordable housing. So I am somewhat confused, and I suppose we do have to wait for the detail. The other one that I want to just quickly linger on this one, this particular diversity SEP, is they're proposing retrospective changes to Part 3 of the Affordable Rental Housing SEP. Now, this basically relates to levies that can be mandated by council whenever someone proposes a reduction in the supply of housing. You know, you have a property that is affordable housing and you want to redevelop it, then you'll be hit with a levy. Currently, it only applies to low rental dwellings that existed on the 28th of January 2000. But they are now proposing, now catch this, watch how this works. They are now proposing that any property that in the previous 5 years before it applies for a development application has a median, it has a rental that falls below the median comparable rent will be captured by this, and the onus will fall on the applicant to prove that they're compliant or non-compliant. And if they put an application in that was deemed to reduce the supply of affordable housing, they will be required to pay a levy. So this is a very concerning development, and quite frankly, the best way that I've seen it described is by Aaron Gadiel of Mills Oakley, and he uses, I think quite accurately, the statement that these sorts of moves in the diversity SEP will create a perverse incentive. So landlords or property owners will no doubt have to take active steps to avoid allowing their rentals to fall below the median rent. Otherwise, they'll get caught by this. So if you see the strange incentives that are hidden within the EIE, even though they're trying to improve diversity and trying to improve affordability, it seems like the opposite is actually going to occur given the incentives that they're presenting. So anyhow, we do need to wait for further details, but it is concerning at the very least. Yeah, so that's just a brief update of the two major regulatory pieces that have occurred in 2020 that relate to boarding houses. If you, as I said before, if you are a POA member, we will keep you up to date and we will keep you in the loop. And as you are aware, we do actively sit on various government consultative bodies. So we do communicate directly with government, and we will be seeking your guidance and assistance with developing policy responses to these prerogatives. Now, it falls upon me to introduce tonight's speaker, and we're very privileged to have Stephen Moore here tonight. Stephen Moore is the Managing Director of the site Foreman. It's a leading group of architects and residential project managers based in Sydney's inner west. They have over 25 years of experience, and they can provide a one-stop shop for boarding house developments. Tonight, Stephen will be sharing in-depth advice and insights on new generation boarding houses and development in New South Wales, and how investors and developers can maximise their yields and return on investment. So I now pass you on to Stephen. You'll just have to unmute.
Thank you, Peter and John. How are you? First off, I thought I should just give a little plug for the POA, and that being that this type of development, boarding house development, is a lot different from your typical development. And for those of you out there that are considering doing boarding house development, being a member of the POA, and they're not paying me to say this, is really essential. The types of services that you need attached to this type of development are very specific. So in other words, if you're trying to rent out, going to the local real estate agent really is probably not a good idea. Looking at things like finance, insurance, and all those types of things, you really need help getting people who are specific to this type of development, in that it is quite different from a traditional style of development. So that's my little free plug for the POA. Thanks, guys. I think, like I said, if you're not a member, I'm not sure, I can't remember what the membership is. It's very small, but you get a heap of benefit out of becoming a member. Thanks, guys. So look, a little bit about me. I am the managing director, as Peter kindly pointed out before, of the site Foreman. We're residential architects and project managers. My history, many years ago, we ran our own building business and saw a need in the marketplace for a service to help people go through development. It's complicated, it's a journey, and it's very easy to go down the wrong pathway. So look, we've been very fortunate over the years to attract some amazing team members that work for us, that can assist people in going through this process. So let's put that to one side. Let's move forward and talk about specifically about boarding house development. So we're going to specifically tonight talk about new generation boarding houses. So what that means is, traditionally people are used to looking at boarding houses. They tend to be old rundown houses with a few rooms and shared amenities. So typically those older style boarding houses don't have self-contained bathrooms or kitchens. They would have a communal bathroom, kitchens and laundry. So what we're talking about tonight is this new generation boarding house. So and to explain that, there are some regulations that sit around these new generation boarding houses, and that is the living area. So if you're looking at a single room, for example, looking at a minimum of 12 square metres for a single room and 16 for a double room, with a maximum room size of 25 square metres. In other words, adding in the kitchen and the bathroom, we can't exceed 25 square metres per single room. And with a double room, obviously the maximum occupancy is 2 adults. Also, this type of development requires a communal room. So obviously, it's a space where it's a breakout space. And typically, as I mentioned before, we would have a small kitchen, small bathroom. And what we've seen over the previous years, as you can see from this graph, is that there's been a huge increase in the amount of DAs that have been lodged, or development applications being lodged, going back from 2017 and looking at those statistics. Unfortunately, we're only running up to 2019, but I can tell you that there's been some massive increases in boarding house applications over the last couple of years as well. And look, one of the reasons for that is demand. Even if we just look at student accommodation for a minute, there's been some studies that I've seen where pre-COVID, we have over 300,000 students that come into Australia each year. And unfortunately, there's only about 90,000 rooms to accommodate those students. So there's a huge shortfall in that student accommodation if we just look at that sector for 1 minute. Obviously, during COVID, we've got nearly no students, but what I have seen is some studies where they're looking at what's going to happen in the future, in particular with student accommodation. So typically, most of our students come from Asia, from Southeast Asia. The students from that part of the world historically go to 3 main centres. So it's either Canada, the USA, United Kingdom or Australia. And I can tell you that what the study is looking at is the parents and guardians of those students that are looking at going overseas. What they're doing is they're now evaluating where those students should be sent. And if we look at the performance of Australia coming out of COVID, obviously we're a clear winner out of those 4. So the predictions are that not only will we maintain that student intake, that potentially that student intake will increase, and that's only one sector for new generation boarding houses. So obviously there's a huge demand. There are some very large boarding houses that are being proposed at the moment, and these are large public companies that are looking to get into this. And obviously those public companies and super funds have done a heap of research, and they can see that there's a huge demand for that. So moving on, let's just have a look at a typical sort of floor plan for a boarding house. So in this floor plan, you'll see that there are some single rooms. So if we look at, say, room number 4 or room number 6, it's a self-contained room. It's got about 12 square metres of living space, plus a small bathroom and a kitchenette. So both rooms 4 and 6 constitute a single room. You can look at room, say, 5, which is obviously a double room. So just looking at boarding house development, typically they fall into 2 categories. So they're either a class 1 building, and to understand that, that's your typical residential house building, or a class 3 development, which is more like a hotel development. So to look at the specifics of each of those 2 classes, a class 1 building is a building which has up to 12 occupants, or about 300 square metres, or a maximum of 300 square metres of development. So that would fall under a class 1 building. The cost of developing that is significantly less than building into a larger development, which is where you fall into that class 3 development. So a class 3 development is where we're developing a total gross area of over 300 square metres. And that typically would go up from single and double rooms. Once we get over, in the class 3 building, once we get over 19 occupants, there's also a requirement to have an on-site manager there. So there are lots of rules and regulations that sit around this style, this type of development, but mainly we're falling into those 2 categories. So obviously, once you get into the larger style developments, you've got a greater income, but because you're now into that class 3 style of building, you're also falling under a different types of legislation, such as fire controls and Set 65, which is excellence in design. So talking about boundary setbacks, etc. So what we might just have a look at is a couple of sort of case studies here. So typically what we see as architects, we see sort of two different styles of clients that are coming to us. So one is someone that's looking to repurpose an existing dwelling. So it might be one that's operating, typically and often, it might even be an illegal style boarding house, not knowingly being illegal, but someone that's running an existing dwelling and they might be renting out the rooms. So often we get that style of client that's coming to us to look to maximise their return on that. So if we look at, say, a case study here of a project that we've looked at in Stanmore, which it was an existing, which is the image that we've got up there, which was an existing dwelling. In fact, running as 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms with 1 parking spot, and it had an existing rental income of about 640 square metres with a land value of $1.8 million thereabouts. The relevance of the land value is in an approved and registered boarding house, there is an exemption there for land tax. So in this scenario, we're repurposing an existing dwelling. We're looking at saving that land tax value of $18,000. So if we look at what we ended up proposing and what is now approved, so we ended up going from those 4 rooms into a 9-room scenario. There were 6 single rooms and 3 double rooms with an average rental income of $350 per week. So we're looking at a maximum occupancy rental of about $3,100 $150 a week, with a build cost of around that $900 to $1 million. So that build cost, just importantly, looks at taking that up to a fully registered boarding house. So obviously, you don't need to look too hard to look at, there's a massive increase in the rental income, that we've gone from $640 a week to over $3,000 a week. Not only that, but we've also picked up saving the land tax of over $18,000. So that's one style of client that would come to us. We also get those that come to us looking to do a complete knockdown and rebuild, and designing a purpose-built boarding house, which we'll have a look at that in a sec. But I'll just going back to that original one here, something a little bit specific about this is this house is actually in a conservation area. So a lot of people may be put off by that, but we have successfully developed a number of these boarding houses which are either in a conservation area. We even have some that are actually heritage items where we've had to maintain and repurpose that heritage portion of the building. And then
I need to just jump in there. The slides are not showing up as they should.
What are you seeing at the moment, Deborah?
We're just seeing the first slide with your preview screen.
Oh, okay. Let's try again for you, because
yeah, that's good.
that's fine.
Oh no.
That's okay. I can show you this here. So if I
apologies for the technical difficulties there, but if we just look at this slide, and obviously there's some questions there. If somebody wants some more information, we can have a chat about it before. But from this slide, and I won't go through the whole lot, the bottom line is we've gone from 4 bedrooms and an income of $640 a week into an approved boarding house with 9 rooms, 6 single, 3 double, and an income of over $3,000 a week. Obviously, there's been a build cost associated to developing the rear of the building. It's around about that $900 to $1 million K, and we've picked up a land tax saving of $18,000. We might have a look at now a specific building which has been a repurpose, and this is another repurpose. So in this example here, it was actually a retail shop in Dulwich Hill, and the brief was to us was, look, what can we do to maximise our income? So in this example, it's actually a heritage listed shop front. So we maintain that shop front and the retail component, and we added a 4-storey addition to the rear of the building, which contained the new generation boarding houses. So one thing that a lot of people may not be aware of in this situation, so up until now, the owner has been paying land tax on that investment property, on that retail component. So in this example where we've got an existing retail component and we're adding a registered boarding house to the back, the way that the OSR or the Office of State Revenue look at this is they proportion it. So in other words, if we end up with 10% retail and 90% boarding house, there's a 90% rebate on your land tax. So that's very important. So we're seeing a huge intake in inquiries that people are looking at these underperforming older style developments where there is an opportunity to increase the yield on that, but also grab some savings in the land tax. So what we might do as well is look at another example here, which is a job at Kingswood, which was a knockdown and rebuild. So this was an older style house where what we did is looked at demolishing the existing house and building a new purpose-built boarding house. So this ended up with a basement and rooms above that. And I think we may actually have a little case study on the rental income for that. Do we have that one there, Clarence? Yeah. So, so what we've done is we've gone down there to, should we don't have the one for?
No, we decided to.
Okay, so why don't we go back to the one from Dulwich Hill. I just noticed that we've had a case study up there for that one as well. Yeah, so Dulwich Hill was a Victorian terrace. This is the one that we've just had a chat about. The current use was a mixed use. So there was a 2-bedroom apartment renting. I know the figures may be a little bit small, so I'll read them out. So it had a 2-bedroom apartment renting at $250 a week with 80 square metres of retail space at $650 a week. The land value was $1.2 million and a land tax of $8,228. So what we've done in this proposed repurposing of this property is converting it into 9 rooms at the rear, renting on average at $350 a week, plus a brand new retail space, 60 square metres of retail, bringing in $750 a week, taking us up to $3,750 with an estimated build cost of $1.2 million. So obviously, we're looking at going from a $650 a week income to a $3,750, and roughly, I haven't worked out, but roughly we're looking at probably about a 90% saving in the land tax value. So that type of repurposing is something that we specialise in. We do a lot of these, and this is the type of thing which is becoming more and more popular, these boutique style redevelopments. So if we also talk about maybe the appeal to investors. So apart from just the land tax savings, so we're looking at this is affordable housing. So whether it's being student accommodation or looking at the local, particularly in these sort of areas here, where if you're looking at what you can rent for $350 a week, it's very little. It's either a shared accommodation in perhaps a unit or perhaps an older style unit. So what we're talking about here is brand new accommodation, at that affordable rate of around the $350 a week. And obviously, there's the savings in the land tax, which we touched on as well. So also moving forward, one of the things that we do at the site Foreman is we look at doing feasibility studies on these. And so if you're looking at purchasing a property with the thought of doing a boarding house, a new generation boarding house, it's very important to look at getting a feasibility done, whether it's something that we would do through the site Foreman or you engage a town planner. Often the numbers can be very deceptive. So we have clients that come to us where they look at a building and they go, look, the FSR is 4:1 and we can build 4 stories and 3,000 square metres. You may find that when we apply all of the constraints that are required for a boarding house, you may not actually be able to develop that full potential of FSR. So having someone look at the total big picture is really important. And when it comes to these types of developments, they are quite complex in the planning controls. It's a bit like putting a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle together. There's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's a lot of thought that needs to be put into it as to the best outcome. And look, I'll give you an example of this. You might have a building where you're tossing up on whether it should be a class 1 building or a class 3 building. So in other words, whether you go over that 300 square metres of development. And sometimes it's just not economical to go over that. So in other words, rather than end up with 13 or 14 rooms, which would tip you into that class 3 building, you may be better to actually peel it back to just under that 300 square metres because of the impact going into a class 3 building will have on your construction costs. And that's the type of thing that a feasibility study will highlight, obviously, among other things. At the moment, the site Foreman are offering a 10% discount on those boarding house feasibilities by quoting the webinar 2020. Please either contact us directly or go via the property owners group. And look, what we might do now is, if there are any questions, I'm obviously here to answer any general questions. Specific questions often can be a little bit difficult to answer on the spot. It might require a little bit more homework and research. So if there are any specific questions, we may need to get one of our senior architects to provide some definite answers to those questions.
Okay, so I'll just read the questions out as oh, sorry, Peter, did you have?
I was just about to say that, yeah, because I can see there's a question from Peter Tharong on the chat line.
Yes, and now I've lost it.
Peter's question was to Stephen. Stephen,
yeah,
he was asking, does the site Foreman look just at work just in the Sydney metro area, or do you also provide services New South Wales wide?
Yeah, New South Wales wide. We've recently completed one up in Jesmond, which is a large purpose-built new generation boarding house, looking at the influx of people running into the Newcastle area.
Okay.
So someone has actually asked for the site foreman's contact details. We'll provide those with the link to the recording. But
1300 728 006.
1300 728. What was the
1300 728 006.
006. So I'll just put that in the chat. I did have another question that I saw earlier. This was for you, Peter. Which API would student housing be carried out under? Would that be the affordable housing SEP?
Currently, well, look. So this is I suppose part of the issue that haunts the semantics of all the planning codes. I mean, we don't really have a planning code or a SEP for student housing. We don't have a planning SEP for co-living. We don't have a planning SEP for all these various things. And what's occurred is because you know, often a lot of the planning rules are quite rigid and are very sort of mainstream oriented. You see that in Sydney, there's a lot of mainstream sort of supply that when the affordable housing SEP was introduced, in particular the new generation boarding houses, it became, I suppose, the go-to to provide diversity because there wasn't really an excellent other pathway to do it. So through the new generation boarding house SEP that was brought in 2009, and by the way, POA was involved with the introduction of that, we saw these new generation boarding houses sort of effectively morph into different forms of diverse housing that sort of worked on different niches of demand. And you know, it's not surprising to see that, because I think one of the big challenges with the planning codes is there is no outlet for diverse supply. I mean, it's also very mainstream orientated, and while it is very important to have a mainstream planning system, so many people don't fall into the mainstream. I mean, there's 2 million Australians who are currently casual part-time workers, who are shift workers, who are on contracts, who are, you know, moving around, nurses that have 3-month contracts at Prince of Wales 1 year, and then they're at Westmead you know, later on in the year. I mean, it's very hard for them to be living miles and miles away from the hospital. I mean, they've got a shift work arrangement. They've got to start their shift or finish their shift at wee hours of the morning. You know, their long days driving, getting into work. They need to be able to get easy access accommodation that's affordable, reasonably close, and the capacity for them to move as their work moves. And that's just one example, and there's a plethora of them. So I suppose in answer to your question, I'm not familiar with another mechanism that enables different forms of housing. I suppose that is a part of the idea behind the diversity SEP, and I think in principle, it's a great idea. The thing that we're worried about and very concerned about actually is I just don't know whether it will deliver, but we have to wait to see the detail. And so far, the EIE seems to suggest that the incentives in the diversity SEP are somewhat perverse, as Aaron described them.
Okay, thanks, Peter. This one's to you, Stephen. Has your firm dealt with boarding house applications which have sat within the 25 to 30 contour in circumstances where the LEP has that NEF clause? Technical.
Okay, so let me translate that. So they're asking site Foreman has done development 25 to 30 rooms size and have dealt with ANEF clause, which is in relation to aircraft noise, Stephen.
Yes, so the answer is yes. We've done a couple of large ones. That one that we just talked about in Jesmond and Newcastle was in that range. Of also, we've done one in Redfern as well. So yes, we've done plenty in that larger range, yes.
Okay. Hold on, there was one here. This one's to Stephen. What's the typical build cost per square metre for new gen boarding houses?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that will depend on whether we're refurbishing an extra space, an existing space, or whether we're looking at building a brand new dwelling. But typically around about the $3,000 per square metre for development cost, excluding basement. So if we're having to provide basement car parking, that would be an additional cost.
Okay, let me run this one by you. So two more, hold on, I've got to find, very tricky. Hold on. This person would like to know, what is the typical build cost per square metre if the building envelope already exists? For example, on the first floor of a mixed-use building.
Yeah, look, it's a pretty difficult one to answer that because it'll depend on how much work that's required to the existing building, and it will also depend greatly whether it's a class 1 building or a class 3 building. So in the class 3 building, there's a lot more fire controls and other impacts on the construction cost. But look, if someone's got an existing dwelling and they wanted to get some ideas, please contact us and we can give you a rough idea of what it might cost.
Okay, I know you've got a bit more to get through, but so we'll just ask this one and then deal with the others later. This person has said they do boarding houses as architects for clients too. One of the common questions they get asked is it better to knock down and rebuild when it's a house conversion to a boarding house? And what has been your experience through the projects that you have delivered so far?
Yeah, and again, that will depend on whether we're in that class 1 or class 3. Typically, if it's a class 1 building, if we're looking at extending, inner city property, in 9 times out of 10, we would be keeping the existing dwelling and keeping as much of that as we can because we don't have the same sort of fire controls, etc., that you would have in a class 3 building. So if it's a small development under 300 square metres, typically we would look at keeping the existing dwelling and repurposing that existing dwelling.
Peter, I think there's a question maybe towards you or the POA. So the question is, will the POA support improvement to the energy efficient design, which would be transferable to additional comfort level for boarders?
Well, that's an interesting question.
We've over the years have collaborated with, I guess, third parties that are in the energy efficiency space. And we've done presentations on those. So I guess the answer is yes, we do support any energy efficiency schemes and initiatives for design. Of course, POA are not in design themselves, but certainly for on the occupant side of things, we do support it, especially if it's going to add value, of course. To the buildings, and of course push better returns, and that would obviously lead to improvements in the quality of living for the occupants.
Maybe I could chime in there as well. Energy efficiency in moderate terms will reduce the running cost of the boarding house. So obviously we're making it more efficient to run, therefore the running cost of that boarding house will go down. And given the nature of the way that the rentals occur in there, so typically the rental figures would include, electricity costs and water, etc. Most owners would be looking at doing energy efficient because it's going to reduce their running cost as well. And we certainly encourage people to look at the most common energy efficient things that we can put in. So good quality windows, good insulation, all of those things are really important in any development.
If I can, I noticed one of the questions here from Tony is how strict is the parking requirements? Are there exemptions for type blocks? But I suppose if I could expand on that question, Stephen, what's your experience with dealing with council? Sites where maybe you don't quite meet, or it's very close. I understand under the Affordable Housing SEP that there are a number of matters that council cannot refuse consent on a number of topics. But what's your experience in dealing with stuff where they might be just slightly off on parking or etc.?
Look, most of the controls, I'm going to say, are fairly rigid, but parking's one of those things. If you can show that, one, that you can't provide the parking, and I'm talking about inner city here. So, we've got probably half a dozen running in at Sydney City Council at the moment, or recently been approved, where we haven't met the parking requirement. And fortunately, councils applied a bit of common sense there. So if we've got building something in Redfern and it's aimed at student accommodation for the local university, most of these people aren't going to own cars anyway. So what we're providing is bicycle or motorbike parking, and we've got a history of being able to get around those parking requirements. However, if you're building a brand new boarding house in the outer suburbs of Sydney, council's going to go, well, there's no reason why you can't provide the parking, and perhaps being that geographically you're further away, that there'll be more reliance on a motor vehicle. So it is horses for courses. Inner city ones, we've had a lot more success in being able to get around parking. Outer city ones, it is fairly rigid in those controls.
Stephen, if I could also on that same topic, sorry, Deborah, do you find some councils are harder to deal with, some councils easier to deal with? I mean, do you have any experiences you might be able to share on that topic? I don't know.
They're all hard, Peter. There's no easy council.
It was a loaded question. It was a trick question, Steve.
They're all hard. Look, I suppose our experience with Sydney City Council, particularly with parking, they are a bit more flexible. We had one recently we got approved, which was quite a complex repurpose. It was the previous use was a pub. It was an old pub that had been converted into an art gallery, and our client purchased it like that. It was uneconomical to run as an art gallery. He came to us and said, look, what can we do? He's actually associated with one of the universities, so he sort of had an understanding of the need for student accommodation. Now that was a heritage listed building, so the council are actually quite good to work with. There was a balance between heritage and being able to provide the necessary accommodation. And what we found with council in that case is they were quite practical when it came to dealing with this. In fact, council even offered or suggested that we remove one of the car spaces, which was quite good. It was it was common sense applied, and unfortunately in a lot of council areas you don't get that common sense application.
Hi. So one last one. How much does the feasibility study cost?
The regular price is $2,450, and the special for this is a 10% reduction in that. I've got to say, it's a no. We don't make any money out of that. There's roughly about 15 hours worth of work that goes into that from one of our senior architects. It's quite a complex process that we go through.
Okay, so did you need to finish, like, did you have any more slides that you wanted to go through, or?
Sorry, I think Peter's got another question.
I just noticed Lucas has asked a question in relation to any news on when the new housing diversity SEP is likely to come into force. My apologies, I was going to say something about that, but I must have forgotten.
And I was going to skip over that one thing.
Great minds think alike, yes. Look, we've heard is rumours. There's nothing solid. I mean, Stephen might have some comments to make in a moment about this, because we were talking about this earlier on. The only thing I've heard as a rumour, and you cannot rely on this, is that there is a view that the build to rent provisions in the the housing diversity SEP are a high priority. You know, there's a jobs component, stimulus component in that, and there's some rumours that maybe they might just forge ahead with that early next year, but really I can't comment. I can only tell you that from past experience with new government regulations, I mean, there is a process. I mean, for example, it's going to take them 6 months, they reckon, just to draft up the Share Accommodation Act. I mean, back in July, the Housing Diversity SEP was just an EIE. I mean, have they come to drafting? Have they come to recommendations yet? Don't know. I can't answer, but I normally these processes take a bit of time. But you know, we are in unprecedented times, and who knows what governments are capable of doing when there's a bit of pressure on them. I don't know if Stephen has some further comments.
Yeah, look, I do. I actually had a meeting with a fairly senior town planning consultant last week, talking about this very thing, and I think the difficulty about this is the amount of unknown. Like there's no certainty in what these changes will be, and if we look at what's happened in the past, when these changes come into play, they tend to be more restrictive. So our advice is that if you're thinking about doing a boarding house, let's work with some controls, and let's work with what we know now, because what we don't know is what these new controls are going to be. And certainly from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is the controls aren't really going to benefit a developer. So if you're thinking about doing something like this, it's probably a good idea to get an application underway and get it in so they can be dealt with under the current controls. Whatever the new controls are going to be, they're going to be more difficult. You know, we don't even know things like whether the land tax benefit is going to be passed over. So, you know, and a lot of people, if this is a secondary investment property, it can be a fairly significant sort of thing. And as Peter may point out, or may have already pointed out, that once these new regulations, they don't even need to come into force. Once they're a draft regulation, the council can actually rely on that draft. So, you know, there is a large amount of uncertainty when this will become a draft. So, yes, not to labour on the point too much, but if you're thinking about doing something, get cracking as soon as possible, because lodging an application for a boarding house is complex, and it takes time to prepare that application. So typically, even if you started today, it could, by the time that you finalise that design and you know, finished all of the supporting expert consultants reports and other things that are to be lodged with an application, it can take 4 to 6 months to get that application from today, having it ready to be lodged. So yes, it's something that there should be some urgency about it if you're looking at doing something.
Okay, there's a question to the POA panel. We are new to, from Santo, we are new to New Age boarding house concept. Do you have consultants with help on the operational side of things once the build is complete? Now, the POA has committee members as well as current operators and property managers on their panel that you can have a chat to. in regards to the actual, if you mean the management of a boarding house? The answer is yes, we do. So if you do become a member of the POA, then you'll have access to those people to have a chat through your journey. As I said earlier on, in case anyone that's missed, and Stephen's already mentioned this, boarding house development and the management of it is a very, very specialised niche area. You've got to surround yourself with those experts. It's not really something you want to DIY if you haven't done it before, have any experience or exposure to, because it's a regulatory minefield. And you've got to be on top of it.
John, how do people become members, and how much is the approximate annual membership fee? Okay, so let me just throw up the slides to get to the membership. So POA nsw.com.au is where you want to head. We've got a plethora of information there about membership fees. It's roughly $200 a year.
John? We can't see anything. Blank.
Okay, so poansw.com.au for the website. Can I share screen, Deborah, at the moment?
Yeah, but you were sharing a blank screen.
Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, so head on over just down the bottom there, poansw.com.au, and have a look at the membership tab there, a little bit about the committee. You can read up about the backgrounds of the committee and their qualifications, as well as the benefits of membership and what you get. So just keep in mind that Property Owners Association is made up of property professionals. They are investors themselves. They are managers of property, and so there's a wide range of experience. And probably if we put it all together, Peter, that'd be something well over 100 years of property investing experience in New South Wales. If we look at it collaboratively.
And the cost for membership?
Yeah, it's about $199 a year, or for 2 years you get a discount. You know, that pays dividends by just one phone call to the help desk, and to navigate yourself out of any sticky or tricky situations, or anyone we can connect you with on your journey, on your property investing journey.
Okay, are we wrapping up?
So we're just on 8:10. We do need to wrap up. I do like to thank our special guest, Stephen Moore, from the site Foreman. That was some terrific and valuable insights into new generation boarding house and repurposing your existing properties to maximise your returns. And for anyone that's missed any detail, we have recorded this session. There were quite a lot of registrations in the last 20 minutes as well. Anyone that's come on and missed anything, this session is recorded and will be distributed to anyone who's registered to attend this session, or those who couldn't make it for any reason will receive a recording. We'll have to edit that. It'll take a little bit of time, but we'll get it out to you. And you can sit down in your own time and go through it once again, or share it, of course. So just finishing up this session, I do want to thank our sponsors and the committee. It's been a roller coaster of a year for us, but we've learned so much. We've had to pivot here and there. With the ongoing changes due to COVID, but that's I guess where our members are more educated than the rest, because we are feeding them constant and up-to-date information as it happens, and as well as Peter mentioned, we've got a seat at the table with the government. We're talking to them directly, and that journey's been going on for a very long time, and we have close relationships there to navigate, ask any questions that we're unable to answer, and of course circumnavigate any of that fine points that inside of this ever-growing legislative and regulatory environment that's upon us in property investing. So thank you very much for sitting out with us till tonight. We're just in the middle of planning our 2021 series of webinars for next year. And as a member, those will be available to you, and we'll keep our communication up to anyone that joins the association, of course. And we do hope to see you or hear from you as well with any suggestions that you may want us to bring forward in our workshops and webinars for 2021. So from us to you, wishing you a safe and happy festive season. And we look forward to catching up with you in the new year. I'm John Gilmovich.
I'm Peter Dormier.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here tonight.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much.
All the best to everyone.